The more I actually listen to people, is the less intimidating they become. And that might sound a little bit strange, but I'm not saying that people become less impressive once I get to know them. But what I'm saying is confidence looks very different from a distance than it does when you're sitting across from somebody and really paying attention to them. For example, from across the room, somebody might seem completely sure of themselves. They speak clearly, they project their voice, they don't really have a problem being noticed. While you might be standing there thinking about whether the sentence that you're about to say is even worth saying. So naturally, they look more confident than you. But lately, I've been thinking, what if some of what looks like confidence is really just insecurity with a stronger voice? Because there is somebody that I work with who I have always seen as more confident than I am. They're always talking, not in an obnoxious way. They're not screaming across the room or anything, but they project their voice. They normally speak pretty early and they have no problem being seen. And I'm almost the opposite. I can be in a room full of people, and if I genuinely don't think that I have anything useful to say, I'm completely fine with just not speaking. Well, at least most of the time. Sometimes I probably should speak, but on those days, my brain always decides that it's a beautiful day to contribute absolutely nothing. But generally, I don't like talking just to prove that I'm present. I would rather wait until I actually understand what is happening or until I have something that I think would add value. And before I even realized what I was doing, I had basically decided that this person was even more competent than me. My brain promoted this guy through three different positions without even conducting an interview. And that sounds stupid when I say it out loud, but I think that we do this with people all the time. Somebody speaks with confidence, and we just assume that they probably know what they're talking about. And if they always look comfortable, we start believing that they probably feel comfortable too. The problem is we're comparing everything that we can see from them to everything that we can feel inside ourselves. Of course, that comparison is going to make you feel smaller. You can hear all of your own doubts. You know when you're pretending to understand something. You know when you had something to say but spent so long thinking about it that the conversation moved on without you. Meanwhile, with the other person, you're only seeing what actually made it out of their mouth. You don't hear everything that happened before that. And one day I was speaking to this coworker alone, and for some reason, I kind of approached the conversation a little bit differently. Usually, when I'm talking to somebody who I think is more confident than I am, part of my mind starts trying to keep up with them. I'm listening, but at the same time, I'm thinking about what I should say next and whether I sound intelligent enough. Basically, I'm trying to have a normal conversation while also running a small PR campaign for myself. And when you really think about it, this is kind of ridiculous because I'm supposed to be listening to what this person is telling me, but half of my attention is somewhere inside my own head checking whether my last sentence received positive reviews. But this time, I stopped doing that. I didn't try to match their personality, and I also didn't try to prove that I could be just as confident as they were. I just listened. And the more I listened, is the more I started noticing that this person wasn't nearly as secure as the persona that I had created for them inside my own head. There were certain parts of the conversation where it almost sounded like they were trying to convince themselves just as much as they were trying to convince me. They were still speaking confidently, but underneath that, I could hear a little bit of uncertainty. Obviously, not in some dramatic way, before some of you start asking me if I'm a psychiatrist or something. I'm not saying that I looked into the person's eyes and downloaded their entire psychological history. It's not like they suddenly broke down and confessed their whole life was a lie. It was much smaller than that. I just started to notice how they explained certain things and how much my reaction seemed to matter to them. And when the conversation became a little bit more personal, some of that confidence that I thought was just permanently there wasn't really there anymore. And I remember thinking, oh, you're just a person. And that probably sounds obvious. Of course, they're a person, but I don't think that I was treating them like one inside of my head. I had turned them into this completely secure character who always knew what to say and probably never questioned themselves. Meanwhile, I was treating myself like the unfinished product. And once I stopped trying to perform and really listened, that whole image started to disappear. Not in a bad way either. I didn't suddenly think less of them. Honestly, I kind of understood them a little bit more because now I could see the confidence wasn't fake, but it also wasn't complete. They could still speak well and carry themselves confidently while dealing with doubts that I just couldn't see from across the room. Both things can be true at the same time. And realizing that actually gave me more confidence in myself. Because for a long time, I think that I assumed everybody else had some kind of inner certainty that I was missing. Like they had already figured out who they were, and I was the only person walking around improvising. But the more I really watch people, is the more I realize that everybody is just making this shit up as they go. Some people are just a little bit more comfortable doing it. And I think the distinction matters because confidence isn't the absence of insecurity. You can still doubt yourself and be confident. The confidence comes from being willing to move while the doubt is still there instead of waiting until you magically reach this point where you never feel awkward again. And I think that was one of the biggest misunderstandings. I thought I had to become secure first. Then I could speak more. Then I could put myself out there. But if I wait until I never feel insecure again, I might be waiting for the rest of my life. Because even some of the people that I thought had already reached that point clearly haven't. They just learned how to operate without needing every insecurity to disappear first. And that changed how I looked at my own personality too. For a long time, I thought that being quieter automatically meant that I was less confident. And to be fair, sometimes it does. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that every time I stay quiet, I'm some wise philosopher carefully studying the room, okay? You know the statue with the guy sitting there with his chin in his hand? Yeah, I'm not him. Sometimes I genuinely just don't know what the hell to say. And sometimes I think of the perfect response about 20 minutes later when the conversation is over and everybody has already gone home. But being quiet does not automatically mean that you have less value. There's a difference between being quiet because you're actually listening and being quiet because you're scared of what people are going to think if you speak. And I had to be honest with myself about that too, because it is very easy to hide behind your personality. You can start saying, well, I'm just a quiet person. And sometimes that's genuinely true. But sometimes, if we're being real, that is just a much nicer way of saying that you don't want to feel comfortable. That is something that I have had to catch myself doing because I don't want to become some completely different person. I'm probably never going to be the guy who walks into every room and immediately starts talking to everybody. That's fine. But I also don't want to have something useful to say and keep it inside my head because somebody else in the room seems more confident than I am. Those are completely different things. And I think that paying closer attention to other people has actually helped me separate them. Because when somebody intimidates you, a lot of the time you aren't even reacting to the real person. You're reacting to the version of them that your mind created. You notice one strong quality about them, and then you start filling in everything that you cannot see with the best possible version. If somebody speaks really well, now suddenly they must always know what to say. You don't stop and think that they could still go home and overthink something stupid that happened 3 hours ago, just like you. Your mind just fills in the blanks. And then you compare the imaginary version of them to the most insecure version of yourself. That is a terrible matchup. You're basically putting your behind the scenes footage against somebody else's trailer and wondering why their life looks better. And what makes it worse is that the imaginary version of them can't really disappoint you because they don't exist. The real person eventually will. Not because they're secretly terrible, but because once you spend enough time around anybody, you start seeing the little things that make them human. That is actually what happened with this coworker. The more I listened to the person, is the less power the fake version had inside my head. And I think that there's another side of this that I didn't really understand before. When you're constantly worried about how you're being perceived, you actually stop paying attention to everybody else. Your entire focus becomes, how do I look? How do I sound? Was that awkward? And after a while, a normal conversation starts feeling like some weird audition where you're trying to earn your place every 30 seconds. But when I started putting more of the attention outward, the pressure came down. I could actually listen. And once I could listen, I had something real to respond to instead of trying to manufacture the perfect response before the other person had even finished talking. That has probably helped my confidence more than trying to act confident. Because acting confident always made me feel like I had another job to do. Now I'm trying to get better at just being there. And if I have something that I genuinely want to say, I say it. It might not come out exactly how it sounded in my head, and sometimes I might have to correct myself a little bit halfway through, but honestly, that is fine. Nobody is going to go home and hold a meeting about the one awkward sentence that you said. And if they do, I think they might have a bigger problem than you do. The point of all of this is not to start looking for weaknesses in everybody around you. I really don't want that to get lost, because if the only way that you can feel confident is by convincing yourself that everybody else is insecure, then you haven't really solved anything. You've just found another way to compare yourself. What I'm saying is that you need to stop automatically putting people above you. Look at the actual playing field. Pay attention to the person who is actually standing in front of you instead of the character that you created for them inside of your own head. Because once you start doing that, you realize that you don't have to tear anybody down to feel equal to them. They can still be impressive. You can still learn from them. You can still look at something that they do and think, yeah, I want to get better at that. You just don't have to turn one quality that you admire into proof that they're somehow better than you in every other part of life. And I think that this is the type of confidence that I actually want. Not confidence where I walk into the room believing that I'm better than everybody. Just enough confidence to realize that I'm allowed to be there too. I don't have to become louder just because somebody else is louder. And I definitely don't have to wait until every insecurity inside me disappears before I start saying what I actually want. Because the truth is, the people that you're intimidated by are probably still trying to understand themselves just like you are. They might just be a little bit better at hiding the parts that you cannot see across the room. And the more I actually understand that, is the less intimidating people become. If you've liked this video, like and subscribe, and put a comment down below. Peace.